Hi, residents of Olds, Alberta, and everybody else following the situation that Connor has been put into. This is message or status report number 5 for February 24th, 2014. What some people have been asking is what has gone on with Child Protective Services. So here is the status, and a couple of people asked why they weren't involved sooner. When this entire ordeal began in February of 2013, the lawyer that I was using at that time instructed me specifically to not file any complaints with the City Police Department or with Child Protective Services or government agencies. His goal was originally to have this all come out in a child custody assessment, and since he was never able to get a child custody assessment, it never, although it came up in affidavits in court, it never became a focus in court. So why wasn't it reported a year ago? It wasn't reported a year ago because the lawyer involved specifically said, don't report it. So anyways, that aside, let's go with what has happened. One of the things you have to realize, we're going to give you a little background, is the biological father has had a history with Child Protective Services over his life. His mother, which would be Connor's grandmother, is schizophrenic and is on medications, and has had her daughter, which would be the biological father's sister, taken away from her and put in a home at times. The daughter is autistic. So the biological father's sister is autistic, so, and quite severely. She lives in a home normally throughout the week and visits on the weekend. So there is a severe history of mental illness in his family. You have the schizophrenic, grandmother. You have the autistic aunt. You have the older brother that believes poop is a toy that should be played with. And you have the biological father, which seems to have several mental challenges himself. So it's kind of a long story, and I'll get into his mental state in other status messages. But so you've got a background of mental illness in the family, and with that, he has experience dealing with these types of challenges, and he has experiences in how Child Protective Services does their investigations. So starting in early February of last year, early February, pretty close, he started doing what is referred to as conditioning or prepping, and a lot of people would also refer to it as brainwashing Connor into, and we're talking not minor brainwashing, we're talking hardcore brainwashing into how to respond to questions, what to say to questions, physically changing events, running these events over and over with Connor in his head for hours on end, so that Connor himself starts to doubt what happened, or he starts to regurgitate the new story as truth versus the old story. The biological father also physically threatened Connor that he is not allowed to talk to an adult outside the home about anything that occurs inside the home without his permission or involvement in some way, shape, or form. And this, of course, is so the biological father can hide his his crimes and his real activity, both with Connor and with the older brother. He has threatened Connor from the standpoint of not, telling him, threaten physical, repercussions if he asks anyone for help. And he started conditioning Connor, right at the beginning of February last year in regards to all of this, in, working on his brain, working on his lines of thought, how to respond to people, so that he could successfully cover up everything that's gone on. And it's probably one of the ways that he got his sister back in the house at periods of time, despite, the authorities taking his sister away. He's got the experience in how to, snowball the authorities. So basically, the authorities come in and they like to do their, their surprise interviews. The only problem you have with surprise interviews is they only work when the children are not prepped. If the children are prepped or conditioned, their investigation is completely useless, and their pattern of investigation is completely useless. So they started speaking to Connor, and they interviewed him, ignoring the fact that he had close to 11 months of prep work done on his brain, and that he is being threatened not to talk to anyone. And so, as can be expected, Connor would not ask them for help, and he would not tell them what was going on. So because Connor would not say anything to them, they can't substantiate or verify what is happening to him. Now, something you also need to know, Connor asked for help from four separate adults back in basically December, January, and early February of 2013. I guess it would be December of 2012, and then January, February of 2013. And that's what started this. When Connor started asking adults for help, and letting on to what the older brother and the biological father was doing to him, that's when the biological father arranged for this abduction or this taking of him, so that he would be able to cover this up. And that's why the brain conditioning or the brainwashing or the prepping all started so early last year. He was in panic mode because he was being found out then. Now, at this point in time, we've only identified 4 adults that Connor asked for help from. There are quite possibly more out there. Now, I also have to point out that Child Protective Services has ignored this. They have ignored the fact that he has asked multiple people, and it seems to be pointless in providing them any information, because their methods of investigation are completely inappropriate and ineffective in situations like this. Their approach and training only works when they can catch the child before the parents had any chances of prepping them or brainwashing or conditioning them. And my understanding that I have been able to derive over the last month is the legislation in Alberta will only allow Child Protective Services to get involved if the child physically asks for help, or, for example, a teacher at the school witnesses certain behavior. Now, as I mentioned in previous messages, the teachers at the school were made aware of all of this, and they've actually participated in the brain conditioning of Connor, the changing of events. So the challenge you have is when the therapists at the school, and they're not really therapists, they're like a counselor at the school is being used on a child, and the counselor is being kind of told and prepped what to say and how to interact with the child. The counselor inadvertently effectively participates in covering up the child molestation and what has gone on. So even though the school was made aware of it, the question we have to ask is where is the school's negligence in all of this? Are they negligent? What part did they play? I think over a period of time, it would take years for all of that to come out. And, the counselor at the school did admit in conversations that she was not qualified to participate in things like this, in situations like this, or counsel in situations like this one. Yet, the biological parents insist on using her, which, there's a big catch-22 when they, the biological parents refuse to let Connor see a real doctor, a real psychologist, or a psychiatrist, or an actual qualified person. They refuse to let him be interviewed or researched, or research is not a word, treated, or counsel or therapy. There's the word I'm looking for. Sorry, I'm stumbling today. As long as unqualified therapists have been playing with his head for a year, it's going to be a long time before the real truth comes out, which is one of the reasons why I did all the polygraphs before. So, the challenge we have is that Child Protective Services refuses to acknowledge the fact that the methods that they're using in this investigation are completely ineffective and useless. They're refusing to acknowledge that he has asked other people, because, and I don't know whether that's just out of arrogance on their part, or whether it's a matter of the legislation really has their hands tied. And as long as the legislation has their hands tied, you can't expect more out of them either. They got conned and they got played by the biological parents. The biological father had enough time to condition and prep Connor's brain, and especially with the assistance of the counselors at the school, to pass a quick, unexpected interview from Child Protective Services. So the challenge we have is that they, at this point in time, are not ending anything. They just can't substantiate what has happened to Connor, and because of that, they are sitting on the sidelines until something else comes up. So that I will talk to everybody out about at another point. So this is a prime example. This is another reason why I've wanted to write a book, because it has demonstrated clearly something we all knew, and that is how often Child Protective Services in Alberta fails the children. Now the question is, are they failing the children because they use ineffective interview processes, or are they failing the children because the legislation has tied their hands? Have they failed the children because potentially there are too many cases on them and they're understaffed? Or have they failed the children just because of potential arrogance that comes out of their office in some cases? So it's going to be an interesting one to see.